Welcome, age of vintage society. Andy Griffith made homespun southern wisdom his trademark as the wise sheriff in The Andy Griffith Show and the rumpled defence lawyer in Matlock. He plays Sheriff Andy Taylor and led an ensemble of characters and actors that the audience never forgot. Why Andy Griffith had put his fist through a wall in a moment of anger. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Andy Griffith, whose portrayal of a small-town sheriff made The Andy Griffith Show one of American television's most enduring programs. Griffith's career spanned more than half a century on stage, film and television, but he would always be best known as Sheriff Andy Taylor in the television show set in a North Carolina town not too different from Griffith's own hometown of Mount Airy, North Carolina. The Andy Griffith Show is considered one of America's best TV series and is utterly deserving of its lofty reputation. Between 1960 and 1968, Sheriff Andy Taylor entertained millions of Americans, and the show's innocent and warm tone retains a spot in many sitcom lovers' hearts. The Andy Griffith Show showcased small-town life in the fictional burg of Mayberry, starring Andy Griffith as Sheriff Andy Taylor, Don Knotts as Deputy Barney Fife, and a young Ron Howard as Griffith's son, Opie. Though it took place in the 1960s, it felt somehow displaced in time entirely. Initially, Griffith played Taylor as a heavy-handed country bumpkin, grinning from ear to ear and speaking in a hesitant, frantic manner. The style recalled that used in the delivery of his popular monologues such as, "What it was football." He gradually abandoned the rustic Taylor and developed a serious and thoughtful characterization. Producer Aaron Rubin recalled, "He was being that marvellously funny character from No Time for Sergeants." Will Stockdale, a role Griffith played on stage and in film, one day he said, "My God, I just realised that I'm the straight man. I'm playing straight to all these kooks around me." He didn't like himself. In first-year reruns, and in the next season he changed, becoming his Lincoln-esque character. As Griffith stopped portraying some of the sheriff's more unsophisticated character traits and mannerisms, it was impossible for him to create his own problems and troubles in the manner of other central sitcom characters, such as Lucy in I Love Lucy or Archie Bunker in All in the Family, whose problems were the result of their temperaments, philosophies and attitudes. Consequently, the characters around Taylor were employed to create the problems and troubles, with rock-solid Taylor stepping in as a problem-solver, mediator, advisor, disciplinarian and counsellor. Aunt Bee, for example, was given several wayward romances requiring Andy's intervention. Opie suffered childhood missteps that needed a father's counsel and discipline, and Barney engaged in ill-considered acts on the job that required Sheriff Taylor's professional oversight and reprimand. Andy Griffith has also said that he realised during the earlier episodes of the programme that it was much funnier for him to play the straight man to Knotts' Barney, rather than his being the originator of the comedic scenes between them. Griffith was born on June 1st, 1926 in Mount Airy, North Carolina, the only child of Carl Lee Griffith and Geneva Griffith. Young Griffith was raised with very little material possessions. As a child, Griffith was taken in by his relatives until the point at which his parents had the means to buy a house. Coming from a family with considerably less means than many at the time, Griffith would often sleep in dresser drawers. Still, his father worked hard to provide his family with a better life, and when Griffith was only a few years old, the family was able to buy their own home. Despite his humble beginnings, Griffith grew up with a deep appreciation for music that would carry on throughout his life and culminate in a fruitful career in music as well as film and television. Griffith was interested in music from a very early age and cultivated a flair for performing in front of his classmates at school. He attended Mount Airy High School, where he participated in the school's drama program. A Baptist, he also found inspiration from Grace Moravian Church minister Ed Mickey. who led the brass band and actually is the person that taught Andy to not only sing, but how to play the trombone, which he managed to save up the money to buy his own instrument. Various things solidified Andy's interest in music. First off, country western music was always playing on the family radio, and then there were services at the Haymore Baptist Church, which were filled with hand-clapping, body-swaying and singing. Additionally, he would constantly look at the musical instruments featured in the Spiegel catalogue, and then, in 1941, he saw and fell in love with the film Birth of the Blues, which, as the title suggests, is about the start of jazz. While attending the University of North Carolina on a music scholarship, Griffith discovered an interest in performing and began taking acting classes. In 1955 he made his Broadway debut in No Time for Sergeants, and earned a Tony Award nomination for his portrayal of an Air Force draftee. He reprised the role for the 1958 movie after having made a strong film debut in A Face in the Crowd. As he grew up, Griffith continued to invest his time into his entertainment career. After he graduated from college in 1949, his degree was in music. He would go on to teach high school music for 3 years before he made the decision to pursue a career in entertainment. "I was not an athlete and I wasn't a good student, so I was kind of nobody. So when I started all this music business, I became a little somebody then." He began pursuing it in earnest, working as a monologuist and television actor. It was during this time that he developed what became his "aw shucks" farm boy persona that would serve him well through much of his career. When he turned 18 years old, Andy, like everyone else, was required to register with Selective Services. While he was undergoing a required medical evaluation, they discovered he had a herniated disc in his lower back, sustained years earlier when he had fallen from a tyre swing. As a result, his military services were not required. Griffith's big breakout role was in the 1958 film No Time for Sergeants, co-starring the popular comedian Don Knotts. It was when Andy and Don Knotts first met. The two of them began an immediate friendship, sparked by the fact that Andy recognised Don's voice as that of Windy Wales on the Bobby Benson radio show. They would of course co-star in the film version as well, and that experience would ultimately lead them to the Andy Griffith Show a few years later. Andy was a natural storyteller, and he made his first real foray into show business by producing a monologue in 1953 titled What It Was Football, a funny bit in which a hillbilly tries to explain the complicated rules of the game. It took 5 live performances for him to overcome his nervousness regarding the recording microphone, but it went on to sell more than 50,000 copies. This release showcased the young actor's southern home-style humour, but it was a dramatic turn in Elia Kazan's 1957 film A Face in the Crowd that displayed Griffith's range as a performer and gave him his big break in Hollywood. Careers are a funny thing, oftentimes running hot and then cold before getting hot again. Andy had done remarkably well for himself with the stand-up routines and the TV, stage and film versions of No Time for Sergeants, but then things started to change. He appeared in a film called Onion Head that tanked, the audience recognising it for what it was, which was an attempt to cash in on No Time's success, and didn't do much to shake up that film's formula. And then in 1959 he returned to Broadway in the musical Destry Rides Again, which didn't fare that well. But destiny came calling from the ashes of Destry in the form of producer Sheldon Leonard, who had the idea for a series and wanted Andy for it. It was, in rough form, the concept for what became the Andy Griffith Show, the idea being they would do a pilot in one of Sheldon's other series, The Danny Thomas Show, and spring the show from there. Andy was reluctant. He wasn't crazy about the idea of the small-town sheriff, but he did like the producer and agreed, particularly because he would own half the show. The Andy Griffith Show ran for 8 seasons and highlighted the innocent joys of small-town living, but under the surface the main cast harboured their share of scandalous secrets. Most notably Griffith, who played Sheriff Andy Taylor, struggled with his peculiar nature and relationships with women. The television star blamed himself for the departure of Andy Taylor's first love interest, Eleanor Donahue. Andy couldn't get enough of Anita. Eventually he proposed, even though he was already married. The actress turned down Griffith's proposal, but the lovebirds did eventually marry on screen. She asked to be released from her contract because of her and Griffith's lack of chemistry. When pharmacist Ellie Walker was introduced in the first season, she was intended as a romantic interest for Andy Taylor. Later, Griffith additionally admitted that he struggled to show any affection for Donahue on screen. Though Griffith had difficulty showing Donahue affection, the actor had less trouble with his last love interest, Anita Corsout. According to some, Griffith, then married to Barbara Edwards, had a passionate affair with the Helen Crump actress. In fact, one unfortunate crew member apparently caught the two in the act after delivering food to Griffith's hotel room. Despite his calm on-screen demeanour, Andy Griffith suffered from a short fuse in real life. At least during one tantrum, he punched a hole in one of his own house walls, something that resulted in extensive bandaging to the offending hand. For 2 episodes in Season 2, Aunt Bee and the Warden and The County Nurse, Andy sports a bandage on his right hand. His injury was explained on screen as the product of a scuffle with the Gordon boys. After an unexpected condition that resulted in temporary leg paralysis, Griffith would make a triumphant return to the small screen in Matlock as the titular character Ben Matlock. Matlock ran successfully from 1986 to 1995 on both NBC and ABC. In Matlock, Griffith played a country lawyer who worked in Atlanta, Georgia, a character made popular for his southern drawl and his flawless case record. By the end of its initial season, Matlock was already a ratings hit, airing on the Tuesday night time slot. Griffith won a People's Choice Award in 1987 for his enduring work and acting chops on Matlock. Griffith would famously leave the Andy Griffith Show in 1968 while the show itself was still wildly popular. At this time, Griffith would start his own production company, which he called Andy Griffith Enterprises in 1972. However, Griffith's initial alternative TV offerings were considerably less successful shows like Headmaster, The New Andy Griffith Show, and The Jaegers, among others. Andy had 3 different wives during his lifetime. His first was to Barbara Bray Edwards, a singer, who he asked to marry him 3 days after they first met. That marriage took place on August 22, 1949, and the couple adopted a son named Andy Samuel, who would sadly die in 1997 after years of battling alcoholism, and a daughter, Dixie Nan. The marriage lasted until 1972, but was filled with great tension stemming from the fact that while Andy's career soared, he wouldn't allow Barbara to pursue one of her own. The following year, obviously Andy didn't like to drag things out, he married Greek actress Solika Kasuto, which was a marriage that lasted until 1981. 2 years after that, he married Cindy Knight. Even the wholesome town of Maybury could not escape the messy dramas of real life. Still, the Andy Griffith Show offers a sweet escape from reality and will remain a classic for years to come. The show has since gone on to be ranked as the 9th best show in American television history. In the latter part of his life, Andy was plagued with a number of health issues. In 1983, he was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome. Griffith himself would depart this mortal coil after suffering a heart attack in 2012. In a peculiar twist, though, he was buried within 5 hours of being pronounced dead. Few people in this world will ever have more influence on our lives than Andy Griffith, an actor who never looked like he was acting, a moral compass who saved as many souls as most preachers, and an entertainer who put smiles on more faces than almost anyone. This was as successful a life as is pretty much possible. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Andy Griffith? The Andy Griffith Show became a beloved part of pop culture.